On today's episode of Thinking Aloud, we're going to be looking at one of the most controversial chapters of Revelation as we discuss the two beasts of Revelation 13. Next on Thinking Aloud. Welcome to another episode of Thinking Aloud. I am your host, Michael Wilson. I want to say thank you to all of our new subscribers, those of you that have been making comments. I will say that we've gotten a little bit of pushback on our teaching of Revelation, which is perfectly fine. I was fully expecting that because, as I've said before, Revelation is one of the most debated books of the New Testament, and it almost did not make it into the canon of Scripture. So there are people that hold really, really tightly to their view of Revelation, and a lot of people do hold to a futuristic view that says that there's coming a rapture and there's going to arise an Antichrist and a 7 year tribulation and all of that. I am not here to fight anyone or argue. I am certainly open to dialogue and having a conversation, which I've had some great conversations with some folks over this. But I'm not going to just try to prove my point because in the end, none of us have this all 100% figured out. I think that when the end of time comes, whenever that is, and we look back, I think that we're going to realize just how much of it we got wrong, not necessarily how much of it we got right. And the second thing I would say about that is this, that your view on Revelation has nothing to do with your salvation, has nothing to do with your relationship with Jesus. Whether you believe that he's coming back at any moment and the world's going to go through a 7 year tribulation period, or whether you're like me and believe that most of Revelation has already happened, the important thing is that you live the life that Jesus modeled every single day. So that if I'm wrong and there is a rapture, you're guaranteed to go. You're going to be okay. And if I'm right, then we continue living and we continue making things better as the increase of Jesus's government never ends. It just keeps increasing and increasing and increasing. And so, again, please leave some comments, like this, share it. If you disagree with me, that is perfectly fine. I welcome your comments. I welcome your viewpoints. I just ask that you be cordial because, again, none of us have all of this down 100%. Although I do know that there are some people out there that think they do. So, what are we doing with this series on Revelation? Well, I am simply presenting a way that a lot of people have never heard before. Most people, at least in my area of the country, in what I call the buckle of the Bible Belt, believe in a 7 year tribulation that follows a rapture of Jesus coming and snatching the church out before this dreadful being called the Antichrist comes and wages war on earth and then eventually is going to wage war with Jesus at the end of the 7 year tribulation. That is a popular belief. It was certainly made even more popular by the Left Behind series. But if you'll do some studies in history, you'll find that this viewpoint really has only been around since the 1830s, and it was highly promoted by John Darby, and then in Scofield's study Bible, C.I. Scofield picked it up and then put it in his study Bible, and before you know it, it became the popular version of eschatology. And the reason I say that is this, is that oftentimes we know what we believe, but we've never really taken the time to dive into why we believe what we believe and to see where it comes from. So if you were raised in a church and this is all you've ever heard, that there's going to be a rapture, tribulation, antichrist, and all of that, if that's all you've ever heard, all you've ever known, then when somebody like myself comes along with a different viewpoint that is not just a small group of people, there's a lot of people that view it this way, and there's a lot of the early church fathers saw it this way. Again, Revelation is a very debated book over its meaning. But if you hear somebody like me teaching a new way, then suddenly you're forced to either grab tighter onto what you already believe or you have to open your mind and your thinking, which is why I call my show Thinking Aloud. You have to open your mind to think through what we're saying, and is there any validity to it? I had to do this. I did not come to this viewpoint overnight. I was raised and even taught as a young preacher a pre-tribulation rapture, a coming Antichrist. But it was in the early 1990s that I began to read about a different way of interpreting Revelation, and it took me a little while, but eventually I came to understand and see that the way that I've been presenting this makes a whole lot more sense than the way I was raised. Now, if you haven't watched any of the previous episodes, I would encourage you to go back. I know there's quite a few of them, but at least go back and watch the introductions, the several that we did as an intro to this, because Revelation is such a vast book and it is a very symbolic book. And what we're going to see in this episode is a lot of symbolism, as we've seen already. But the futurists, those who believe that all of this is going to happen in our future, they tend to, in my opinion, make the mistake of taking symbolic things as literal. Now, I do believe, as I've said before in previous episodes, that John is seeing in a heaven, he's seeing a vision in the heavenly realm. So he's seeing stuff going on in the spirit, and it does have natural consequences in the earth. But what John is describing is what he is seeing in the spirit. So we are going to read Revelation 13. I'm going to go through it verse by verse. As I did the last, I believe, the last two episodes. Prior to that, I was just kind of covering an outline. But I also want to say this: I am not giving a in-depth, exhaustive verse by verse where I connect all the dots. I'm going to leave a lot of holes because I'm just giving a general overview. And so I would encourage you to study for yourself, and I can recommend some great resources. But again, I'm not trying to connect all the dots in this series. It's a general overview. And so I know that some of you might listen to this and go, but what about this? And what about that? I get that. And I appreciate that. And I'm not saying, if you want some answers, please message me or leave a message in the comments, and I'll be glad to dialogue about that. But that is not the purpose of this particular series. So let's dig right into understanding Revelation to see if we can demystify this mystical book. And as we get into Revelation 13, I want to give you a synopsis here that Revelation 13 introduces two beasts: the beast from the sea, which is a political military power, and the beast from the earth, which is a religious or a spiritual power. And together they represent Rome's imperial power and emperor worship, backed by false religion and persecution of the saints. Now, most people that agree with my viewpoint, which is called a partial preterist, or some people are full preterist, versus a futuristic interpretation, all of us agree that the beasts are the Roman Empire. Where we differ is that I am looking at the historical Rome, and the futurists believe that the Roman Empire will be restored sometime in the future. I remember as a kid, I was taught that it was it was going to be the European Union, as they began to talk, and they were all coming together to make the 10 kingdoms of the Roman Empire. The other thing I want to address right at the very front is this: the word Antichrist is nowhere in the book of Revelation. Now we're going to see and bring out in a little bit where some people will pull that from this, but the word itself is only used in First and Second John. The book of Revelation does not use the word Antichrist whatsoever. I think that's a very important point. I think that we have to bring that to play into this. But again, that's my opinion and the way that I interpret this. So let's get into Revelation 1 through 13, verses 1 through 10. And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. Now, we talked in the last episode about the dragon, and we know, according to the last chapter, that it is Satan. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, just like the dragon did. And on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his head were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard with his feet, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast, and they worshipped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him? There was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months, which was given to him. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. And it was also given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. Now, again, this is something that the futuristic folks are going to point to and say all the nations. But I believe, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but we have to understand that John's seen this in the spirit realm, and the word nation can also be translated land. And all who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. If anyone is an ear, let him hear. If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. It's a lot of scripture, I know, but we're going to unpack that as we go along. So we have the beast from the sea, and we want to talk about the symbolism and the identity. Well, it rises from the sea, and the sea in biblical terminology is always a symbol of chaos, and it's also can also be used as a symbol of Gentile nations. And we're going to look at Daniel 7, or reference Daniel 7, and this beast has 7 heads and 10 horns, which equals Rome, which was the dominant world empire at the time of John's writing of Revelation. And it's a composite of the 4 beasts that we see in Daniel 7, the leopard, the bear, and the lion. And this equals Rome as a culmination of the previous empires. And if you know, if you remember the book of Daniel, Daniel saw 4 kingdoms that were going to arise. He actually saw a vision, and the interpretation of that vision was that there were going to be 4 kingdoms that arose. We had Babylon, and then the Medo-Persians, and then the Greek Empire. And then the last empire to arise was the Roman Empire. And so these 4 kingdoms were given in a vision to Daniel. And historically, we know that that's what happened. You had the Babylonians, and then the Medes and the Persians, and then you had the Greeks, and then the Romans. So all of this is hearkening back to Daniel chapter 7. And the beast represents the Roman Empire, particularly from Julius Caesar to Galba. And one of the heads appears wounded to death, but is healed. Now, if you're a futurist, then you believe that the Antichrist is going to suffer a mortal wound, but be resurrected. That is an interpretation. I don't believe, in my opinion, I don't think it's a correct interpretation. I think the more correct interpretation we can see from history. And let's take a look at that. So Nero died in AD 68 by suicide, and his death nearly shattered the empire. And you can read, there are historians that talk about the impact that Nero's death had on the empire. And then after Nero died, we have what we call the year of 4 emperors in AD 69. There were 3 emperors that one after another that took over, and the empire was almost destroyed after Nero's death during these the year of 4 emperors. There was a lot of infighting, a lot of civil war was going on. It was chaos. And then Vespasian rose up, and he was pronounced the Caesar, and he stabilized Rome, which is what we consider the healing. So again, if you're looking at Revelation and reading it from a symbolic viewpoint, and that's what John is seeing, John is not on the earth watching a literal beast with 7 heads. He is seeing this in the realm of the spirit. And in the realm of the spirit, what John is seeing in this vision is this beast has a wound that kills it or almost kills it. Well, again, Nero dies. The empire is almost shattered. And if it wasn't for Vespasian coming up, Rome could have ended during the year following Nero's death. But Vespasian rises up and he restores order and peace into the Roman Empire. So, therefore, the beast looks like it's going to die, but it doesn't. It is healed miraculously from a fatal wound. But again, we have to understand we're talking about symbolism that does have natural consequences. If you hold to a futuristic viewpoint, like I did when growing up, then you believe that the Antichrist is going to be this beast. The Antichrist is going to suffer a fatal wound, but he's going to be revived. That's how you have to play that out. So let's dig a little deeper. So the people worship this dragon by Satan by worshiping the beast because the beast gives, or the dragon gives the beast its authority. And Rome and its emperors are symbolic of this worship. And there was emperor worship that was going on during the Roman Empire. This blasphemy equals claims of divinity by the emperors. And if you just do a Google study, you will see that Nero did claim to be God. He claimed to be divine. We also know that Julius Caesar did not, but Augustus Caesar, his nephew, the second emperor, he, and I believe the Senate included, deified Julius Caesar. And then as we go down the list, eventually, when we get down to past, or I mean, future emperors, there was a huge cultic worship of the Roman emperor that was going on in the Roman Empire, especially at the time that John writing Revelation and further on. Now, remember, John is writing to 7 specific churches in Asia Minor. 7 specific churches that were in a specific place, which was occupied by the Roman Empire, influenced by Rome, and he's writing to them for a specific purpose. And if you go back and read Revelation 1, 2, 3, and 4, you'll see that John says these things must happen hereafter. There again, it's a matter of interpretation of that word hereafter. The futurists say it's going to happen down the line. Those of us from a partial preterist or a preterist viewpoint believe that John is writing and saying, hey, this is going to happen soon. We correlate that back to Jesus saying in Matthew 23 and Matthew 24, both, that this generation will see all of these things happen. So let's go a tad further. Now, authority was given for 42 months, which is symbolic of a limited time, but the authority was given for 42 months for persecution of the saints. And we link this to AD 64 through 68, with 68 AD being the death of Nero. And again, if you do some research into history, you'll find that Nero persecuted the Christians for exactly 42 months. The dragon was trying to get rid of the Christians. We read, where the dragon in Revelation 12, the dragon was trying to kill the children of the woman. So again, it depends on how you interpret this and how you see this as either futuristic, or if you overlay it with history, like I'm doing, you will see that these things happened back in the first century. So a little further, there's persecution and patience. The beast makes war on the saints. There's an intense persecution of Christians under Nero. I've talked about this I think in the previous episode, where Nero would persecute the Christians. He would attach them to stakes, tar them, and light them on fire, and use them as human torches. When Nero burned down Rome, a third of Rome, he blamed the Christians. There was a lot of persecution that was going on under Nero, and yes, it did continue with other emperors, but it did start, or Nero was a major persecutor. And then there's the call for endurance. If anyone is to be taken captive, well, what is John saying here? he's saying to stay faithful even in the midst of suffering. And Jesus told them in Matthew 24, he said, "You're going to be taken. Some of you are going to be persecuted, and some of you are even going to be killed." And we can read again historical accounts where many Christians were persecuted, and not only persecuted, but actually were killed for their faith. So then let's read verses 11 through 18. Then I saw another beast. So here we have a second beast coming up out of the earth. So the first beast comes out of the sea. This beast is coming out of the earth. And he had two horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. Now, where do we get the lamb idea from? Well, the Lamb of God in Revelation 1, because John heard about the Lion of the tribe of Judah, but he turned and he saw a lamb. Or I'm sorry, I believe that's in Revelation 4, that he turned and saw a lamb. He never did see a lion, he saw a slain lamb. Verse 12, he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. He performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the presence of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs, excuse me, which it had given him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image of the beast who had the wound of the sword, excuse me, and has come to life. And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And he causes all, the small and the great, the rich and the poor, and the free men and the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. And he provides that no one will be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the name of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. So, again, we're going to contrast futuristic interpretation versus a partial preterist interpretation. And I want to remind you again that John is seeing in the spirit realm, he's seeing a beast come up out of the earth. Now, this beast, it does seem, has effect on natural men. And then as we get to the end of chapter 13, we get that famous scripture which says that man will not be able to buy or sell unless he has the mark of the beast. Now, growing up, going to Sunday school as a teenager, I remember when I was told that our social security numbers were going to be the mark of the beast. Then I remember when barcodes first began to be used on grocery items and stuff, and they started scanning the barcodes. Well, then I was told, well, no, that's going to be the mark of the beast. And then everybody throughout history has tried to figure out who who this beast is. Honestly, I almost said the Antichrist, because still some of that teaching's in the back of my head. But that's the way the futuristic people look at it, is like, who's the Antichrist? Because they're looking for his number. But again, the word Antichrist is not used. We're talking about the beast. Now, I realize that there are those of the futuristic interpretation that believe this beast is the Antichrist, or some would say he's the false prophet and the first beast is the Antichrist. However, that's not what John says here. He doesn't call him the Antichrist, he calls him the beast. And this beast comes up out of the earth. And there is a mark. Well, we're going to talk about that. If you're a futuristic person, interpretation of this, then you believe that somehow, somewhere, we're going to get a physical mark in our hands or our foreheads. Right now, the belief is that it's going to be a microchip. Okay. And then, so when people start getting RFD chips put in their hands that has their medical information or whatever they put in there, people are starting to get, oh my gosh, that's the mark of the beast. Okay. So one of the things that we have to ask ourselves is this: God marks his people. Is God marking his people with some literal mark, or is it symbolic? Well, why do we take the mark of the beast as something literal when the mark of God, we would take that as symbolic? We don't see people walking around with a mark of God in their hands or their foreheads, but yet we believe that somehow during this tribulation period that's supposed to happen, that people are going to walk around with the mark of the beast in their hand or their head, or they're not going to be able to buy or sell. Now, again, knowing that teaching like I do, I know that some people would say, well, yeah, he marks those that are going to go in the rapture. Well, again, I think you have to do some stretching on that. But let's break this down and see if we can make some more sense of this. So, the symbolism of this beast from the earth, he appears like a lamb, but he speaks like a dragon. In my opinion, and the way I interpret this, and others as well, this equals false religion with a satanic influence. Think cult worship or emperor worship, because the beast is always pointing back to the second beast, is always pointing back to the first beast. So, if this is religious, if this is cult worship of the emperor, it makes sense that they're making people worship the first beast. So he exercises authority of the first beast, which is Rome, performs signs and wonders to deceive people into worshiping the empire. The second beast is the imperial cult or local authorities, enforcers of emperor worship. And sometimes in Revelation, it is called the false prophet. But why would it be called the false prophet? Because it's prophesying the greatness of Rome, the eternalness of Rome, the deity or the divinity of the emperors. That's all blasphemous against the one true God. And you have to remember that Revelation is a book not of end times. It is a book, it is a revelation of Jesus being on the throne, Jesus being the main one of the universe, Jesus being the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. It is all about the revelation of who Jesus is, and that Jesus is Lord and Caesar is not. And at that time, with Caesar proclaiming to be God and the Savior of the world and all these things, then there's a direct conflict for Christians. Who are they going to worship? Are they going to worship Caesar? Are they going to go along to get along, or get along to go along? Or are they going to pledge allegiance to Jesus, which very well could have cost them their life? So we see that um, this beast is especially linked to Asia Minor, or cult worship, emperor worship was especially linked to Asia Minor, where the I'm getting tongue tied, emperor worship was very strong. So then we talk about the image and the mark. This was set. So this beast sets up an image of the beast to be worshipped, likely a statue or representation of the emperor. Now, I was not aware of this until I began to do studies for this series. But Nero erected 120-foot statue of himself in Rome. Now imagine that. You're emperor and you set up 120-foot statue of yourself and you call yourself divine. So we see here that historically we can see where this beast, this spiritual beast, sets up an image in the natural. John's seeing this in the realm of the spirit, but it does have natural implications. So this beast in the realm of the spirit is causing people to worship the first beast. Well, Nero sets up a statue for himself. Again, I think the correlation is very, very important. So this second beast enforces the mark of the beast on the hand and the forehead, which is symbolic of allegiance and economic participation. Those without the mark are excluded from trade. This is social economic pressure to conform. Again, you get along to go along. Now, here's some interesting tidbits that I think are important in understanding the mark of the beast, because this is the controversial issue that so many people are trying to figure out. What's this mark going to be? But if you look back, we can ask the question, well, is there some historical sense of this mark? And I believe there is. So let's take a look. In some Roman provinces, especially in Asia Minor, which is where the seven churches of the book of Revelation were located, they were located in Asia Minor. Citizens were required to offer incense to Caesar and to receive a certificate, a libellus, as proof. So imagine you're a member of one of the seven churches in the book of Revelation, chapter 2 and 3, and you're hearing this letter being read to you, and you hear John write about taking the mark of the beast. Now, you are probably realizing in that context, and in the first century, as you're hearing this, you're recognizing who the beast is. You can see clearly that it's Rome, and you understand because you're living under that pressure that if you don't offer incense to Caesar, then you can't buy or sell. It again, we have some historical precedents for this already happening, and that it's not necessarily something that's going to happen in the future. So again, citizens were required to offer incense to Caesar and receive a certificate as proof. Refusing to do so excluded you from buying, selling, or participating in society. And Christians who were refused were persecuted or economically cut off. And we see that happen in modern times. We see Christians in other countries that Christianity is outlawed or it's not the predominant religion. That if you become a Christian, you can't buy or sell. You can't, people won't trade with you. People won't do business with you. That happens in our modern day society. And there's no mark other than allegiance. Your allegiance is not to the system. Your allegiance, their allegiance was not to the Roman emperor, but it was to Jesus. So a lot of people may not have even liked the Caesar, may not have liked the government, but they did what they had to do. They offered their incense so that they could go and buy or sell. They may not have meant it at all, but that wasn't the issue. The issue was that you had to pledge allegiance to Caesar in order to buy and to sell. The Roman economic system was intertwined with idolatry. For example, trade guilds often required participation in pagan rituals. So if you were part of a trade and you belonged to the local guild, they might require you to worship an idol. Now, again, that is so far removed from our present day thinking. But when you study history and you study the Roman Empire and you see these things, even though it doesn't make sense to our natural modern minds, that was the way of life back then. And these Christians that John was writing to and encouraging, they were living under this type of pressure. Now, again, if you're a future interpretation person, a futurist, then you believe that somehow during the tribulation there's going to come up a one world government, a one world economy, and that the only way you're going to be able to buy or sell is to have the mark of the beast in your hand or in your forehead, and that's going to identify you. Now, could I be wrong? Yes, I could be wrong. I'm not going to sit here and say that I couldn't be. I don't think I am, but it's possible I could be. I mentioned to someone recently that only time is going to tell how this is all really going to play out. Now, I will say that the way that I see Revelation makes a lot more sense than the futuristic interpretation of Revelation. For me, it just makes a whole lot more sense. Let's try to wrap this up. So then we have the number of the beast, 666. Let the one with understanding calculate the number. So why wouldn't John just come right out and say who the beast was? Why did he get cryptic with a number? Well, again, you've got to remember they were living under Roman occupation, and you could not say what you wanted to about the Roman Caesar. In our American society, you can pretty much say what you want about somebody else as long as it's not slander or libel. You can get sued over that stuff, even though people do it all the time. But if you get caught and somebody takes you to court, you can get sued for that. But you can pretty much say what you want about President Trump. You can say what you want about any former president, and people do all the time. I read comments all the time about the things that people think about President Trump, the things that people thought about President Biden, the things that people thought about Kamala Harris. I mean, it doesn't matter, and most of the time, people are free to say whatever they want for the most part, and they do. You could not do that with a Roman Caesar. You could lose your life. You couldn't do that with like King Herod. You could lose your life. And in many countries today, even still, if you say things that are politically against the leader and you're expressing your free opinion, you can go to jail. And many people have went to jail simply because they expressed their opinion that was against their particular government leader. So John is being cryptic here, but he says, let the reader understand. And so he gives them the formula. Let the one who with understanding calculate the number 666. So if you well, first of all, if you understand that in the Hebrew alphabet, each letter also was represented by a number. So there was a numeric value to each letter. Well, the word Caesar, Nero Caesar in the Hebrew came up to the number of 666. So this is seen as a numerical code identifying Nero as the embodiment of the beast. Now, some manuscripts had 616, which also points to Nero, but that's via a Latin spelling and not the Greek to the Hebrew. So again, if you look at all of this from a historical standpoint, it would point to Nero. And there's a lot of evidence and a lot of people that believe that Nero was a monster. And I didn't put this in the notes in the slides, but there was one particular Roman that wrote that Nero was a beast, that he had traveled through a lot of different places, and he had seen a lot of natural beasts. He said, but none of them compared to the tyrant, to the beast called Nero. If you read what the things that Nero did, he was a madman. Probably a psychopath. It was just insane the things that he did, and he definitely persecuted Christians. So let's look at the key themes here. We see Rome as the beast, the primary oppressor of the early church. Then we see Nero as the one with 666, the brutal emperor during the early Christian persecution. False religion was emperor worship and religious systems that allied with political power. But we also have a spiritual resistance, a call to loyalty to Christ even under persecution. And what's our present application? While the specific fulfillments are historical, the pattern does continue: political and religious systems that demand allegiance over faithfulness to Christ. And I can say that we see that right now going on in my country of the United States of America. The church has never been more divided politically than I've seen it right now. And any time that the church gets into bed with politics, we always lose. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't vote, and this is certainly not a political statement, and I think that Christians should follow their heart. But I am going to say that we in America and any country of the world, we have the same choice that we have to make that the Christians of the first century did living under Roman occupation. Is our allegiance going to be to Caesar, or in our case, is our allegiance going to be to our political party? Or is our allegiance going to be to Jesus? And what are we going to do when our political party or our political beliefs differ from that in which we see in Jesus? And here's the danger. The danger is that we always use Jesus to side with our political ideologies. We make Jesus into a Republican, or we make Jesus into a Democrat. And Jesus is neither one of those. Jesus is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He taught us to pray, God, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Not the United States, not Russia, not Ukraine, not China, not India, not any other country, not even Israel. Your kingdom come, your will be done. So we have to determine who our allegiance is going to be. Well, I hope this has helped you. I hope it's given you some things to think about. Again, I'm expecting some that watch this will not agree with me whatsoever, and that is perfectly fine. If you leave a comment, please leave a comment, but just be gracious. Don't. I'm not looking to argue. I'm looking to dialogue and have some conversation. But again, I hope this has helped you. Maybe you've never heard of this before. Maybe this makes sense to you. Maybe it does make sense to you, but you believe in the rapture and you still believe that there's going to be a tribulation and you're kind of afraid to let that go. I get it. I had to do the same thing when I was younger and beginning to transition out of that ideology. I kept thinking, but what if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? But the more I studied, the more I read, the more I looked at things, the more it made sense to me. So, again, we'll be back next week with another episode, and we're going to continue this out until we get to the end of Revelation. Again, I hope that you will like this, share it, and if you haven't subscribed already, please do so. I want to end with this as I always do. You were created by love, out of love, to be loved, and to love. Now go this week and love well. Until next time, God bless.